Hey guys, tonight we begin with something delicate, a hairline crack in something you once thought would last forever. It might be a relationship, a belief, or a part of yourself. Something you cared for deeply has shifted, and now it doesn't feel whole anymore. The temptation to fix it is strong, almost automatic, but tonight we're going to walk a different path. One where you don't rush to patch things up but simply stay beside them. One where stillness speaks louder than action. You will not be able to control the world, but you can control yourself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're holding the vase in your hands. It used to shine. There's a chip near the rim now, barely noticeable to others, but you see it. You keep turning it around in the light, hoping from the right angle it might disappear. But it doesn't. The flaw is there, and it changes how you see the whole thing. This is the moment you stand at the edge of trying to fix what you love. At first, you think it's your job. If you love something, you must preserve it, reinforce it, protect it. But the Stoics would offer you something different. Not repair, but respect. Not mending, but meaning. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." He wasn't being cold. He wasn't telling you not to feel. He was offering you a kind of inner shelter, so that when the vase of your life cracks, you don't break with it. Tonight, the vase might be a friendship that has changed tone, texts gone unanswered, laughter that no longer flows. Or maybe it's a family member drifting further into someone you don't recognize. Or maybe it's you, your body, your hope, your energy. You hold it carefully, but it doesn't become whole again just because you wish it to. This is when you begin to see. The crack isn't always a problem. Sometimes it's an invitation to see more clearly. Do you remember the first time something you loved disappointed you? Maybe as a child, a parent breaking a promise, a friend not keeping a secret, or a toy you treasured finally falling apart. The instinct then was to cry or run or patch it up with tape and hope for the best. And in some ways, not much has changed. But as an adult, you're invited into a quieter space, a place where you can observe the damage without rushing to cover it. The Stoics would ask, is it truly broken, or just no longer what you expected? This question opens up a soft paradox. What if imperfection is not the opposite of love, but the space in which it deepens? A Japanese art form called kintsugi comes to mind, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold, not to hide the cracks, but to honor them. The object becomes more beautiful for having been broken. But even before that golden moment, there's another layer the Stoics point to, the acceptance of the break itself. There is a quiet strength in simply letting something be cracked, not abandoned, not ignored, just seen. You may be thinking, but isn't it right to try to fix what I love? Isn't that care? And yes, often it is. But there's a subtle trap here. When you begin to equate love only with fixing, you risk making love conditional. You only love what behaves, what shines, what responds to your efforts. True love, the kind the Stoics respect, isn't so needy. It doesn't say, "I love you as long as you remain whole." It says, "I love you even through the fracture." And there is a deeper irony still. The more tightly you grip what you love, the more likely it is to slip through your fingers, like trying to hold water in your palm. Control becomes the enemy of presence. Sometimes when you stop trying to fix, you start truly seeing. In this light, letting go of control isn't giving up. It's stepping back enough to witness the truth. The truth that some things fall apart and still hold meaning. That not all cracks need filling. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is nothing at all. Of course, this isn't easy. You'll feel the urge to fix rising in your chest like a tide. You'll want to send the long text, have the deep talk, or replay the scene until you find what you could have done differently. That's natural. But in those moments, try asking yourself, is this action loving or is it an escape from discomfort? Because often, fixing is a disguise for fear. fear of change, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty. But here's something else Marcus wrote in his journal, long before it became a quote. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart. That kind of love doesn't avoid the crack. It bows to it. It sees it and stays anyway. So tonight, as you breathe slower and feel the weight of your own memories settle beside you, consider this. What if the crack isn't a problem to solve but a truth to honor? What if you don't need to fix the vase, but simply sit beside it and let it continue holding space? The light is softer now. The shape of the vase is different but still familiar, maybe even more beautiful than before. And maybe in this stillness you begin to see you were never meant to keep things perfect, only to love them while you can. You see the child again in your memory. Not an actual child, maybe, but someone younger than you in spirit. Someone you care about. You remember offering advice gently, then more firmly. You saw them heading toward a decision you knew would bring pain. You tried to guide them, tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. They smiled or brushed you off or promised they'd consider your words. And then they went and did it anyway. There's a particular kind of ache in that. The ache of watching someone walk straight into a wall you saw coming. The Stoics knew this pain well. Seneca, who was a tutor to the Emperor Nero, watched his student grow into a tyrant. Despite his efforts, wisdom fell on closed ears. And yet, Seneca did not curse the heavens or collapse into despair. He returned inward to the only place he ever truly held authority, his own soul. You feel this too, don't you? The rising heat in your chest when someone you love rejects your help. The slow, hollow feeling that comes after, like watching a boat drift away with no oars. You want to swim after them, to rescue them, to steer them back. But something in you pauses. What if they're not lost, just learning? There's a paradox here that bites softly. Sometimes, letting others suffer is an act of respect. Of course, not in cruelty, not in indifference, but in understanding that pain, too, is a teacher, and often a more effective one than you or I will ever be. You want to fix them, but maybe they don't want to be fixed. Maybe, just maybe, they don't even need fixing. Only time, experience, and the dignity to stumble. This stirs an uncomfortable truth. Love without control often feels like helplessness, but it's not. It's humility. You remember how often you didn't listen, how many times people warned you and you went ahead anyway. Sometimes it hurt. Sometimes it was the only way you truly learned. And years later, you might even be grateful they didn't stop you. There's something stoic in that memory, something deeply human. Epictetus said, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly." The same applies to people. Don't demand that they learn on your schedule, that they understand you fully, that they appreciate your care in the way you hoped. Wish instead to love them as they are, not as you'd shape them to be. It's not easy. Your heart wants to sculpt, not sit still. You want to bring order to their chaos. And maybe sometimes you do have wisdom they could use. But wisdom cannot be poured into a closed vessel. It must be invited. Imagine holding a bowl of cool water. You see someone you love, dehydrated, confused. But they won't take the bowl. You try to convince them, beg, even splash a little water toward them thinking they'll see, but they turn away. And here is where your real power lies, not in chasing them with the bowl, but in holding it steady. Let your steadiness be the invitation. They may come back, they may not, but your love doesn't need to be frantic to be real. There's a quiet rebellion in this way of loving, a radical gentleness. To release the fantasy that your guidance will always land. To release the pride that says, if only they had listened to me. You step back, not out of coldness, but out of reverence. You cannot live someone else's lesson. And when you try, you risk robbing them of it. There's an old story whispered among Stoics of Cleans, who once watched a student grow arrogant and stray from practice. Others mocked the youth, or warned him with scorn. But Cleans simply nodded and said, "The rope pulls tight before it teaches." He understood. Sometimes people need to test the rope themselves. Maybe tonight you think of someone in your life like that. someone making decisions that make your stomach twist, someone whose pain you feel in your own body. It is an act of courage not to fix them, to sit in the ache, to wait with love without urgency. And maybe you turn the mirror slightly toward yourself too. Recall the people who wanted to fix you. Did it help? Did it land? Or did it make you feel small, misunderstood, even resentful? There's a deep freedom in saying, I trust the process of your becoming, even when it doesn't look how I hoped. And beneath that trust, there is something more ancient than even Stoicism, a quiet honoring of the soul's journey. Each of us must walk our own steps, fall through our own mistakes, burn our own fingers on the flame. You don't have to cheer for their suffering, but you don't have to stop it either. Be there when they return, be kind when they call. Keep the door open, but don't stand on the threshold shouting instructions. Let them discover the weight of their own choices, and let that discovery be theirs alone. You sit quietly now. The child in your memory fades into the background. Not forgotten, just released from your grasp. You no longer carry the burden of their learning. You are lighter for it. And maybe in that space, you can finally begin to tend to your own soul, the only one truly entrusted to your care. There is something both beautiful and terrifying about fire. You think of someone you love, maybe a partner, maybe a friend, maybe even a dream. You try to hold them close, to protect them from harm, to offer them a safe place to land. But somewhere along the way you realized, the tighter you held, the more they pulled away. And now there's only smoke where there once was warmth. The Stoics were well acquainted with this kind of grief. Not loud or catastrophic, but the quiet erosion of closeness. And they would offer you something you might not expect, a soft smile, a nod, a reminder that to love something does not mean to contain it. A flame, after all, cannot be grasped. It flickers beautifully in space, but clutch it too tightly and it dies. This is the strange math of love. You protect it best not by possession but by presence. We are taught from early on that love should mean closeness, that if you love someone, you should be near them, entwined in their choices, involved in their every triumph and wound. But true love, the kind that endures, is much more spacious. It breathes. You remember someone once asking, how do you know you really love someone? And the answer came, not in fireworks or certainty, but in quietness, when their freedom matters as much as their nearness. There's a paradox nestled deep here. If you love something fully, you must be willing to let it go. Not because you don't care, but because you do. Because you understand that love is not the same as control, and care is not the same as capture. The Stoic Epictetus put it plainly, never say about anything, I have lost it, but only, I have given it back. That sounds harsh at first, like a denial of your humanity, but listen deeper. He's not saying you shouldn't feel the loss. He's saying your soul does not own what it loves, and in that recognition it finds peace. Maybe you're thinking now of a relationship where you tried too hard, you texted too often, you offered help they didn't ask for, you stayed up wondering what more you could do, say, give, and at some point they stepped back or disappeared entirely, and you were left staring at the smoke. But here's what the Stoics knew. The smoke isn't failure. It's a sign that you tried to hold what could not be held. It was never yours to fix, never yours to control. That doesn't mean your love was wasted. In fact, it means the opposite. To love without expectation, to care without clinging, that's the kind of love the Stoics admired. That's the kind that lasts in a different way. And here's something odd you might discover. The more you allow what you love to be free, the more fully it may choose to stay, or return, or evolve in ways you couldn't have predicted. You become like a garden, not a cage. It's easy to slip into resentment, to think I gave them everything and they left, or I did all I could and it wasn't enough. But those thoughts come from a wounded ego, not a quiet heart. The heart knows that love is not a transaction. It's not about getting something back. It's about presence, witnessing, letting the flame burn as long as it needs to without smothering it. There's a scene, half lost to history, of Marcus Aurelius walking the palace corridors at night, long after others have gone to sleep. The empire weighed heavily on him, but his thoughts were with someone he loved, a son, perhaps, or a friend slipping into illness. And in his journal that night, he didn't rage or cry. He wrote only this: "What is not yours cannot be lost. What was never promised cannot be owed." He was not being cold. He was reminding himself of the nature of all things, fragile, fleeting, and free. You might feel a tear rising now, not from pain, but from release. The deep exhale that comes when you finally stop trying to hold what resists being held. When you realize, maybe your job was never to contain, but simply to witness with tenderness. So tonight, ask yourself gently, what flames have I tried to trap? What people or dreams or identities have I tried to control, not out of cruelty but out of fear? And more importantly, what might happen if I let go? Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean ceasing to care. It means no longer demanding that love look a certain way. It means trusting that even in distance, love can endure. In fact, some of the most enduring love lives in the space between people. The unspoken understanding, the memory of a kindness, the willingness to be happy for someone even as they walk away. This kind of love, love without fixing, isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strength, because it means you've made peace with the truth. Nothing you love is truly yours, but you are always yours. And in that truth you find your footing again, not to chase or hold or fix, but to be steady, open, quietly bright like a lamp in the night. You are not here to capture the flame. You are here to see it dance. There's a storm forming in the distance. You can't hear it yet, but you feel it. In the tightening of your shoulders, the subtle shift in your breath, the way your thoughts scatter like leaves in wind you cannot yet see. It's not a literal storm, of course. It's the kind that builds quietly in your life, through someone else's illness, a sudden change in a relationship, the collapse of something you had faith in. You try to predict it, prepare for it, maybe even prevent it. But the more you try, the more you realize this is not a storm you can chart. It's one you must endure. The Stoics knew these moments well. They called them externals, the forces beyond your command. Illness, the choices of others, fortune, and fate. Their philosophy was not about denial. It was about discernment, about understanding where your control ends and your acceptance must begin. You may feel helpless in times like these, like you're standing on the deck of a ship, watching waves rise without knowing when, or if they will crash. And part of you wants to run below deck, hide, or worse, believe you can steer the weather by sheer force of will. But the storm doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't read your calendar or consult your hopes. It moves how it moves. And your job is not to stop it, but to anchor yourself. This is where Stoicism shines, not in the sunshine, but in the rain. You remember a time, maybe recently, when something unraveled despite all your effort. You showed up. You said the right things, you gave everything, and still it fell apart. A person pulled away, a project collapsed, an outcome you hoped for evaporated like mist. In those moments, the voice in your head asks, what did I do wrong? But perhaps the better question is, was this ever mine to control? There's a freedom in that shift, a sudden spaciousness in your chest. You stop bracing. You stop clenching your jaw around the illusion of power. You start to breathe again. Because not every storm is your fault. Not every loss is a reflection of your value. Some things fall apart because that is their nature, not because you failed. Marcus Aurelius once sat with generals and scholars in his war tent, dictating reflections by candlelight. Outside, his troops were sick, supplies were low, morale was slipping, and yet in those pages he wrote not of strategies or complaints, but of inner clarity. He reminded himself, you have been made by nature for the work of the soul. Stay inside it. He knew, when the world spins beyond your reach, return to the only place that remains still, your own mind. This isn't spiritual bypassing. It's not saying the storm doesn't hurt. It's saying that your response to it is still your own. The weather is wild, but your inner compass, that's yours. It's easy to get swept up in prediction. You try to anticipate every turn, replay conversations, Imagine worst-case scenarios like some twisted form of preparation. But the Stoics would gently challenge that. Why live through something twice, first in your mind and then in reality? There's a lesson in the sailor who watches the clouds but doesn't steer toward them, who sets the sail according to the present wind, not the imagined one. You can't stop the storm, but you can decide how you meet it. And here's something strange. Sometimes it's not the storm that breaks you. It's your refusal to accept that it's here. Resisting what is only deepens suffering. Acceptance is not resignation. It is simply the willingness to see clearly. And once you see clearly, you can act from wisdom, not panic. Tonight, as you lie still, maybe there's something stirring in your life. A situation unresolved. A conversation looming, a fear you haven't named yet. You want to fix it. Solve it, patch it up before it gets worse. But maybe you don't have to. Maybe your task is smaller, quieter, to breathe through it, to ground yourself like a tree in wind, to remain kind even when things feel chaotic. There's a quiet power in that. The power of someone who doesn't need certainty to remain calm. The power of someone who has stopped demanding control and started practicing composure. You think back to earlier nights in your life when storms felt bigger. Remember how you thought you'd never get through that heartbreak, that job loss, that family fracture. And yet, here you are, maybe scarred, maybe changed, but not broken. That's the Stoic spirit. Not immune to pain, but undefeated by it. The storm will come. That much is true, but it will also pass. The sky cannot rage forever. And when it clears, you'll still be here, not because you fought it, but because you stayed rooted through it. And maybe that's what real strength is. Not the ability to fix every storm, but the willingness to sit calmly in the rain. There is a moment, quiet, breath held, when you realize that saying nothing may be the most loving thing you can do. You sit beside someone in pain. Maybe it's a friend grieving a loss, a sibling unraveling in anxiety, a partner tangled in self-doubt. You want so badly to speak, to soothe, to say the perfect sentence that will make it all better. But something in you hesitates, because deep down you know, words won't fix this. And more than that, words might even wound if they're rushed, or if they come from your own discomfort rather than their need. The Stoics understood the potency of silence, not the cold silence of neglect, but the warm, spacious silence of presence. Epictetus reminded his students often, nature gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. He knew that wisdom is not always in what you say, but in how much you choose not to. You may have tried before, giving advice too soon, offering solutions too quickly. Not out of arrogance, but out of love. Still, you might remember the look in their eyes, how it dimmed just a little when you tried to wrap their ache in your logic. You wanted to help, but maybe what they needed was not your clarity, but your quiet. This is the subtle art of restraint, the discipline of knowing that sometimes presence matters more than precision. You remember a time you were in pain, maybe not physical pain, but emotional weight, something heavy you carried alone. And someone sat with you, not to solve, but to stay, not to push, but to witness. And maybe in that moment, their silence spoke more loudly than any comfort ever could. There's a story passed down about Zeno, the founder of Stoicism. One evening, a young man came to him, distraught after being publicly shamed. He asked Zeno what to say the next time someone insulted him. Zeno reportedly looked at him for a long while without speaking, just looked, and finally said, "What needs to be said that silence does not already carry?" At first that might sound evasive, but think again. Zeno was teaching that some wounds don't want answers, they want space. And silence, when offered with love, is space. This kind of silence is not passive, it's attentive. It listens with the whole body. It doesn't rush to fill the air because it understands that pain has its own rhythm, and sometimes that rhythm is slow, irregular, even wordless. We're taught to believe that helping means speaking, that comfort must sound like something. But often, it is the courage to sit in the presence of suffering without trying to shape it that becomes the deepest act of love. You may worry that your silence means you don't care, but consider this. It may be your silence that finally allows them to feel heard. Because when someone is hurting, they rarely want solutions first. They want understanding. They want to know they're not alone. And silence, especially the kind that says, "I'm here and I'm not leaving," does just that. The Stoics held to this truth. Your role in the lives of others is not to spare them their experience, but to embody the steadiness they might reach for in their own time. And that steadiness often speaks no words at all. Tonight, maybe there's someone on your mind, someone struggling, someone you've wanted to reach or help but words feel insufficient or too sharp. Maybe what they need most isn't another message but your quiet belief in them, a gentle nod when they look your way, a presence that doesn't push. This is hard. Your heart wants to do. But the more you mature, the more you realize that real love doesn't always do. Sometimes it simply waits. And waiting in silence with tenderness, that takes strength. The world may misread it. They may think you're distant, cold, uninterested. But you know better. You know that silence can hold more love than all the speeches in the world. Marcus Aurelius once walked through the imperial gardens with his friend Rusticus. The empire was noisy that day, petitions, soldiers, politics. But in the gardens there was only breeze. At one point, Rusticus asked something about suffering, and Marcus didn't respond for a long time. When he finally did, he said simply, "Sometimes the best answer is presence." They kept walking. Nothing more was said. So tonight, let your stillness be your answer. Let it carry warmth, like a soft blanket placed gently over a wound. You don't need the right words. You only need the right intention. You may discover that the silence you offer others becomes the silence you begin to offer yourself. The quiet that says, "I don't need to fix this right now. I don't need to fill this space. I can simply breathe here. I can simply be." That too is a kind of healing. And in that silence you may hear something softer than speech. The steady rhythm of your own heart. The subtle wisdom of restraint. The soul learning, once again, how to love without reaching, without grabbing, without trying to rescue what isn't asking to be saved. Just the warmth of your being. Nothing more. You write the letter. You don't intend to send it, but the words come anyway, faster than you expect. It's full of truths, frustrations, tenderness, and things you never said. Things you wanted them to hear. Maybe even things you wish you had heard from them. And when you're done, you read it again slowly, quietly. Then you fold it, and you set it aside. Not every truth needs a witness. The Stoics would understand this moment deeply, not because they feared honesty, but because they valued wisdom. And wisdom knows that what you say is only part of the story. When, why, and to whom matter just as much. Sometimes truth is a flame. When shared too soon or with the wrong person, it scorches instead of warming. You might feel this tension now. The pull between expression and restraint. The urge to speak your heart, to explain, to defend, to finally be understood. And the deeper knowing that silence may serve more than speech. Seneca, the Roman philosopher who advised emperors and endured exile, wrote many letters. Some were never meant to be read by anyone but himself. They were ways of clearing the mind, of untangling the knots the world had tied inside him. Writing was a form of inner alignment. And for you tonight, maybe it is too. You don't have to send the letter. You don't have to say the words out loud. You don't have to press send just because the message is composed. Completion isn't the same as release. In fact, some of the deepest releases happen in silence. You might ask, but isn't truth important? Shouldn't I speak it? Don't I deserve to be heard? Yes, you do, but ask yourself this. Do I want to be heard, or do I want to be healed? Because sometimes speaking a truth to someone who cannot receive it only creates more harm, not only to them but to you. Your words bounce off the armor they wear and you're left feeling even more unseen. The Stoics remind us, truth must serve wisdom, not ego. If you speak only to satisfy the part of you that's still aching, still proving, still hungry for justice, you risk turning honesty into injury. This isn't suppression, it's discernment. You learn to ask yourself, is this truth ripe for sharing or still ripening within me? You can feel it. Some truths still have heat, they burn in your chest. Others cool with time, settling into the marrow of your understanding. And once cooled, they can be carried more gently, sometimes even wordlessly. Imagine a jar of muddy water. If you shake it, the sediment swirls, clouding everything. But if you set it down and wait, the mud settles and the water clears. Your truth is like that. Let it settle before you pour it into someone else's hands. There's a story whispered from the life of Cleans, the Stoic poet. After a close friend betrayed him publicly, others urged him to confront the man, to call him out, to make the truth known. But Cleans said only, "The wound will speak, but not through me." His silence wasn't weakness, it was mastery. Because sometimes the need to speak is really the need to be seen. And sometimes the person you're trying to reach has already turned away. But here's the paradox. When you stop needing them to see you, you begin to see yourself more clearly. That letter you wrote, it's not for them, it's for you. It's your own clarity, your own reckoning, your own healing, and it's enough. There is power in withheld words, not the power of domination or silence as control, but the gentler power of release. To know that you could say something and choose not to is a freedom most people never taste. This is where Stoicism becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes a practice of inner dignity. You honor your truth, not by screaming it into deafness, but by letting it shape you quietly, patiently. Maybe someday the time will come to speak. Maybe not. But either way, you'll have already made peace with the truth, not through confrontation, but through understanding. So tonight, you fold the letter again. You don't destroy it. You simply let it rest. You've said what needed to be said, not to them, but to the deeper part of yourself that needed to feel heard. And now you no longer carry the weight of unsaid words. You've laid them down, not because you gave up, but because you finally saw that your peace matters more than their reaction. The words remain, but you now can move on. You stand in front of the mirror looking for something familiar. A glint in your eye, the curve of your mouth, some fragment of your past self. The one before the disappointment, before the silence, before the slow drift away from who you thought you'd become. You search the reflection for reassurance, but the mirror doesn't answer. This is the moment you realize you've been trying to find yourself in someone else's face. Maybe it was a friend, a partner, a parent, maybe even a version of yourself you built from the expectations of others. You saw parts of yourself reflected in their praise, their affection, their presence. And when that faded, when they pulled away or changed or simply stopped mirroring you, you felt unanchored, like part of your identity disappeared with them. The Stoics would pause here. They would say gently, "You are not what they see, you are what you choose." It sounds simple, but it lands heavily. Because it means letting go, not just of them, but of the version of you that was tied to them. Epictetus taught that identity grounded in externals, other people's opinions, status, admiration, is always fragile. Because when those externals change, so does your sense of self. And the Stoic response is not to stop caring, but to shift where you root your worth. It's not easy, especially if you've spent years building yourself through someone else's eyes. You wanted to be loved, so you became what they needed. You wanted to be understood, so you mirrored what they admired. You shaped your laugh, your goals, your days around what made them stay. But now they're gone or different or distant. And so you feel unfinished, like someone tore a page from the story you were writing. But here's the paradox. Their absence reveals what was never really yours to begin with. And in that empty space, something true can finally take shape. There's a historical whisper here of Marcus Aurelius, late in his reign, after the death of his wife and many of his children. He wrote not of what they gave him, but of what he must remain without them. To love what is, not what was, he reminded himself. To stand alone if needed. That kind of selfhood isn't hard, it's resilient. Tonight, you may feel the sting of not being seen. Maybe someone who once understood you now seems to miss the point. Maybe you feel invisible to the world you once moved through with purpose, and the impulse is to chase, to seek new mirrors, to find someone, anyone who will reflect you back to yourself again. But the Stoics ask, why not become your own mirror? Why not sit quietly in your own company and ask, without flinching, What do I value? What do I choose? What do I believe, even if no one else applauds me for it? You may find the answer is gentler than you feared, that there's still someone steady inside you, someone who doesn't need constant reflection to feel real, someone who exists not because they are seen but because they see. And that seeing, quiet, clear, inner becomes your new anchor. It's tempting to blame the mirror, to say, they stopped seeing me. But more often, what really happened is this. You stopped reflecting yourself. You outsourced your identity, and now you're simply being invited to reclaim it. There's a quiet metaphor in the moon. It shines not by its own light, but by reflecting the sun. But what if the sun disappears behind clouds? The moon remains, still whole, still moving, still part of the sky. So are you. Tonight, maybe you speak aloud your own name, not for drama, but for grounding. You say who you are, not in relation to someone else, but in relation to your own soul. And you listen to how that sounds in the quiet room. You listen for the part of you that nods in return. And then you smile, not because it's fixed, but because it's yours. You're learning that you can live without the mirror. You can wake up, stretch, breathe, move, without needing to be seen in someone else's eyes to feel worthy of the day. That is Stoicism. Not cold detachment, but sovereign presence. To live in such a way that if no one ever applauded again, you would still choose the same values. To stand, however shakily, in your own selfhood. To say, even if no one reflects me, I am. And in that you begin not just to recover, but to return. To yourself. The hallway is quiet. You're standing there, hand resting on the doorknob of a conversation you've rehearsed 100 times. Maybe it's an apology. Maybe it's a boundary. Maybe it's the gentle acknowledgement that something you once depended on no longer fits who you are. And yet, you hesitate, because some part of you still hopes they'll change, that they'll come to their senses, that they'll return transformed, holding the words you always wished they'd say. But they don't, and the door, like the truth, waits. This is the chapter the Stoics rarely shouted about, but always carried quietly. The moment when letting go isn't an option anymore. It's a necessity. There's no more fixing, no more gentle nudges or hopeful redrafts of the relationship. The silence between you is no longer temporary. The shape of the bond has changed or broken, and now you must choose. Mourn what was or remain shackled to something that no longer exists. The Stoics would tell you this is not cruelty. This is clarity. And clarity, while sharp, is sacred. We are taught to persevere, to keep trying, to believe in redemption. But sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit that something has run its course. That the person you once loved is not the person standing before you now, and perhaps never was. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this in his later meditations, not bitterly but with quiet acceptance. When someone does wrong, remember, you are not responsible for their soul, only your response. You cannot keep twisting yourself into a shape that fits their comfort. You cannot keep hoping they'll notice the effort you pour in. You cannot keep rewriting your needs so theirs won't feel threatened. That is not love. That is self-abandonment. So tonight, you turn the handle. You open the metaphorical door. And instead of walking into a confrontation, you simply walk into the light of your own decision. You let go, not because you stopped loving, but because you started listening. To yourself. Letting go is often mistaken for coldness. But true detachment in the Stoic sense is warmth without demand. It is saying, I carry care, but I no longer carry expectation. You may still love them. You may still hope for their peace. But you no longer tie your own well-being to their behavior. That cord has been cut, not with anger, but with a clean blade of wisdom. There's a story of Epictetus who lost everything, his freedom, his health, even his students at times. But when asked how he remained calm, he replied, no one can take from me what I refuse to tie to them. That's what you're learning now. To love and to untie, to say, I release you. I release the outcome. I release the part of me that kept believing I could make you see. This is not apathy. This is sacred release. Because the truth is, some relationships are meant to end, not because they were failures, but because they served their season. They revealed something. They taught you what you will and won't carry. And now the lesson is complete. You don't have to hate them, you don't have to argue, you don't even have to explain. Some exits are quiet. Some closures happen without words. Maybe tonight you write their name in the air with your finger just once and then let the motion fade. Not as erasure, but as reverence for what was and what is no longer. There will be grief, yes, and relief, often at the same time. And eventually there will be room for breath, for self, for newness. Letting go is not just the end of clinging, it is the beginning of self-trust. You trust that you no longer need someone to complete your story. You are already whole. You are already walking. You are already wise enough to know fixing what you love is not always love. Sometimes it is fear, but you are not afraid now. You are free. You sit with your journal open, but for once you don't feel the need to write. There's no crisis to unpack, no emotional tangle to untie, just stillness. An unfamiliar kind. The quiet after a long season of holding on. It doesn't feel triumphant, not yet, but it also doesn't ache like before. It simply is. This is what the Stoics called apatheia, not indifference but serenity. A state where your passions are no longer wild storms but gentle waves, moving through you without drowning you. You never thought peace would feel like this. You expected clarity to arrive with fireworks or at least a dramatic shift. But instead, it arrives like the sun filtering through curtains, slow, soft, and steady. You almost miss it until you realize you haven't clenched your jaw in hours. You haven't replayed that conversation. You haven't felt the old pull to fix, prove, or chase. This is not the numbness you once feared. It's presence. And it took longer to arrive than you expected. Because here's a truth the Stoics never sugar-coated. Letting go is a process. It comes in waves. Some days you feel proud, steady above it all. Other days, something as small as a memory, a song, or a smell pulls you back under. And that's okay. What matters is that you return to this moment, to yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't return to the old well. It was dry then and it's dry now." But your heart, it keeps checking, it keeps wondering, and that's human. The Stoics didn't reject emotion. They simply didn't obey it. They observed it, sat with it, asked, is this helpful? Is this true? Is this mine to carry? Tonight, as you rest in this unfamiliar calm, you may begin to notice something else. You're no longer angry. Not really. Not in the way you once were. The blame that used to light up your chest like a fire, it's cooled. You see them now not as villains, not even as victims, but as people, flawed, imperfect, doing the best they could with the tools they had. Tools you once tried to sharpen for them without realizing that wasn't your role. Now you simply wish them well and mean it. There's power in that. A soft, sturdy kind of power. Because when you can wish someone peace, even without closure, you've found something stronger than justice. You've found freedom. You think back to a time when you thought peace could only come through answers, through accountability, through them admitting they were wrong. But now you see, waiting for someone else to grant you peace is like waiting for the ocean to dry before you walk. It was always yours to claim. Peace isn't what they give you when they finally understand. Peace is what you give yourself when you decide to understand you. There's an ancient story from Stoic circles about Musonius Rufus, a teacher imprisoned for speaking truth to power. When asked how he remained serene in his cell, he said, "I do not confuse my environment with my condition. The soul, when rightly tended, is untouched by walls." Tonight, maybe your soul begins to feel that truth. You are no longer imprisoned by what they didn't say, by what didn't work out, by the plans that unraveled. You sit here quietly alive, and that's enough. You'll still have moments of doubt. You'll still remember what was, sometimes with tenderness, sometimes with longing. But you won't build your life around it. Not anymore. Because what lies ahead is not a repair of the old, but the beginning of something that doesn't need fixing. You. Not the version of you that waited, or explained, or twisted, but the version sitting here now, listening to the quiet, choosing to feel, choosing not to chase, choosing for once to just be. That's what the Stoics meant by inner freedom. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of self. And you are finally home. You open your eyes in the morning and for a brief second, you forget. The weight, the story, the person you couldn't save. It all flickers behind you, just out of reach. And for that breath of time, you are no one but yourself. Then, slowly, memory returns. But something's different. It doesn't land quite as hard as it did yesterday. It touches your chest, not your bones, like wind pressing against glass instead of breaking through it. This is how healing happens, not with declarations or grand finales, but in soft, almost invisible shifts. The Stoics understood this rhythm intimately. They didn't wait for peace to arrive all at once. They trained themselves to notice when suffering began to loosen its grip, and more importantly, they didn't cling to suffering as proof that they still cared. You might be tempted now to ask, but if I stop hurting, does that mean I've stopped loving? No, it means you've stopped confusing love with pain. The Stoic philosopher Hierocles spoke often of concentric circles, how we begin by caring for ourselves, then our family, our community, and eventually all of humanity. But that center circle, yourself, must remain steady. When love erases you, it's no longer love. It's sacrifice, and even virtue must be tempered with balance. So tonight, you let yourself be still in your own center. Not the version of you they needed. Not the version you tried to become to make things work. Just you. You're not empty without them. You're not incomplete. That's the story pain tries to sell you, that your wholeness is somewhere outside yourself. That it lives in a conversation you haven't had yet, or a memory you keep revisiting like a shrine. But the Stoics would ask, is your worth something to be found, or something to be remembered? Remember now. Remember that there were days before them when you laughed without effort, when you walked into a room without scanning for their eyes, when you made choices without asking, even silently, would they approve? That person wasn't a phase, they were real. And they are still here, under the grief, under the noise, under the effort of trying to fix what was never yours to fix. That's who you're returning to now. But maybe you don't have to rush it. The Stoics didn't rush. They didn't demand instant resilience. They practiced it daily like a muscle. Tonight, resilience looks like choosing rest. It looks like making tea instead of texting them. It looks like tidying your space not for anyone else, but because you deserve a room that feels like yours again. It looks like stepping out into the evening air, just for a moment, and remembering what it feels like to be a body in the world, not a character in someone else's narrative. There's a softness in this chapter of healing, one that the world might mistake for weakness, but you know better. It takes strength to stop replaying what hurt you, to stop casting yourself as both the villain and the victim, to simply say, that happened, I learned, I'm here. There's an old image of Marcus Aurelius walking the colonnades of his palace alone at dusk, the empire quiet behind him. The historian who recorded the scene said he looked neither burdened nor elated, just calm. He wasn't seeking distraction or glory, he was practicing presence. You are doing the same now, not escaping your past, not pretending it didn't shape you, but refusing to be defined by it. The world will still spin. People will still disappoint. Things will still break. But you are learning to return to your inner sanctuary faster each time, where no rejection can unmake your worth, where no silence can erase your truth, where no unfinished story can stop your becoming. This isn't the end of grief, but it is the beginning of trust, not in them, not in fate, but in yourself. You've stopped trying to fix what you love, and in doing so, you've started to love what you are, quietly, firmly, fully. There's a strange kind of sorrow that settles in once the fire has gone out. It's not about the pain anymore. It's about the space it leaves behind. You thought that once the grief lifted, even slightly, you'd feel lighter. But instead, you feel unmoored, as if part of your identity was wrapped up in the very thing that hurt you. And now that it's no longer consuming your every thought, you're left asking, who am I without this story? The Stoics anticipated this moment too. After the storm, after the struggle, after the emotional tide has receded, there comes a stillness that's almost unsettling. It's easy to mistake it for emptiness, But it's not emptiness, it's possibility. It's a blank page, and blank pages are scary when you've spent so long scribbling over the past. You sit with it. A life without the old dynamic, the old longing, the old obsession with mending something that refused to be mended. There's no more dialogue in your head, no more imagined revisions, just quiet. You've stopped needing to fix what you love. Now you face something even more subtle, learning how to love without needing it to fix you. This is where freedom begins to feel real, not as defiance or independence, but as responsibility. For the first time, you're not waiting for someone else to hand you a direction. You're choosing your own. But choice, real choice, demands awareness. And awareness can be uncomfortable. It means asking, what do I value now that I am no longer revolving around them? What do I want to rebuild, not to win them back, but to honor myself? You begin small. You reclaim routines. You cook something you used to love but stopped making because it reminded you of them. You reintroduce color into your space, into your wardrobe. You walk a different route. You listen to new music, not to forget but to live beside the memory without drowning in it. The Stoics would nod here. They believe that character isn't built in crisis, it's revealed there. But it's forged in the ordinary, in how you speak to yourself in the morning, in whether you do the task that no one will applaud you for, in how you treat others now that you no longer need them to fill your gaps. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't always look like cutting ties or booking flights or deleting phone numbers. Sometimes, it looks like washing the dishes without spiraling into rumination. Sometimes, it's choosing not to text. Sometimes it's choosing not to hope. You may still feel flickers of longing. That's natural. The brain remembers. The body remembers. You catch yourself thinking they'd love this or I wonder if they've changed. But then you breathe. You smile at the thought, and you let it go like a leaf on a stream. A thought doesn't have to become a decision. You are not obligated to chase what crosses your mind. This, too, is Stoicism in motion. The art of watching thoughts arise and deciding which ones to follow. You're starting to trust your instincts again, not the anxious ones trained to scan for danger, but the calm ones, the quiet ones, the ones that don't shout but guide. Tonight, maybe you reflect on how far you've come, not in dramatic milestones, but in the micro shifts, how your shoulders sit lower now, how your chest doesn't tighten as often, how your decisions aren't built around how they might respond. You're living your life, not in reaction, but in intention. And that is everything. It doesn't mean you're invincible. You'll still feel pain. But now you meet it with curiosity, not collapse. You ask, what's mine to learn here? What's mine to release? There's a final, beautiful paradox in this stage. The less you need to fix what you love, the more capable you are of loving freely. Without conditions, without strategy, without fear. Just love as an offering, not a currency. That's what the Stoics really meant by freedom, not isolation, but the capacity to love without losing yourself. And that's what you're cultivating now. A love that no longer hurts, a life that no longer waits, a peace that doesn't depend on anyone else seeing it, only you. There's a rhythm to your steps now, not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer walking to escape. You're walking to arrive. Each footfall on the pavement feels deliberate, not heavy, not rushed, just present. You don't check your phone as much anymore. Not because there's nothing there, but because there's no longer an urgency to be somewhere else, to hear from someone, to manage what's already moved beyond your control. This is what agency feels like, not as rebellion, but as quiet choice. The Stoics prized this above all, the return to what is up to you. They called it the dichotomy of control. Some things are within your power, others are not. Freedom lies in learning the difference. You used to spend so much energy wrestling with what wasn't yours, their feelings, their decisions, the timing, the story. You overthought every detail, hoping you could shape the ending. But now you've stepped out of that theater. You've stopped auditioning for a part in someone else's narrative, and slowly you're writing your own. There's no climax, no applause, just a morning where you notice your coffee tastes better, or you laugh without remembering the ache that used to follow. You begin to make decisions without checking how they'd feel about it. You buy things not to impress or signal something, but because they bring you joy. You say no, not to punish, but to protect your peace. This is sovereignty, and it feels like spaciousness. The Stoics weren't rigid monks. They lived in cities, held jobs, raised children, advised emperors. Their practice wasn't about withdrawal, it was about integrity. They asked again and again, am I living in accordance with my values, or someone else's? And now so do you. You start noticing when you're about to say yes out of guilt, or when your silence is actually fear in disguise. You pause, you breathe. You return to your center. Not every moment demands a performance. You're no longer reacting to the past. You're responding to the present. And the present is surprisingly gentle. Of course, there are echoes. You see something, an old text, a photo, a place, and the memory stirs. But now you let it rise without chasing it. You don't have to follow the thread all the way down. You don't have to make it mean something again. You've stopped trying to extract closure from what didn't offer it. Because the truth is, you were never waiting for them. You were waiting for yourself to say, it's okay to move on. And you just did. There's a metaphor in how the body heals. A wound scabs, itches, tightens. The skin knits together in its own time. And even when the scar fades, the body remembers the vulnerability. But it doesn't live in it anymore. You don't forget what happened. But it no longer defines your mornings. And because of that, you begin to open again. Not naively, not recklessly, but bravely. You smile at strangers. You allow yourself to imagine love again, not as rescue, but as companionship. You realize that love, in its healthiest form, is not the fixing of pain, but the joining of journeys. You've stopped trying to be needed. And in doing so, you've become available. To joy, to solitude, to connection that asks for nothing but your presence. This is where Stoicism expands. It isn't just the ability to endure, it's the capacity to flourish. Not in spite of what you lost, but because of what you've gained in its place, yourself. So tonight, maybe you reflect on this. You are not someone who got left behind. You are someone who stopped chasing what didn't stay. You are not someone who failed to fix it. You are someone who chose not to be broken by what was never yours to carry. You are not less for having loved. You are more. Because now you know, love that demands you disappear is not love. It's dependency. Love that asks you to remain rooted in yourself. That is the only kind worth growing. And now you're ready to grow again, not from emptiness, but from truth. You look out the window one afternoon and realize the season has changed. Not dramatically. No sudden downpour or crisp chill. Just a quieter sun, a different angle of light, a breeze that carries something unfamiliar and kind. You didn't notice it happening. It just arrived. And that's when it hits you. This is what inner change feels like too, not always thunderous. Not always marked by milestones. Sometimes healing is like the slow turn of a season. Subtle, consistent, inevitable, if you let it happen. The Stoics knew this. They didn't wait for dramatic transformation. They practiced slow, deliberate shifts. A little more awareness each day. A little more calm in the face of insult. A little more space between the impulse and the action. You're doing the same. You didn't wake up one day completely free of longing or of the quiet echo that follows loss. But you did notice this time that the echo didn't define your day. You heard it and continued anyway. That is strength. And more than that, it is grace. You're not just letting go of a person or a story. You're letting go of the need for a different past. You no longer argue with what happened. You stop trying to rewrite the scene. You stop wondering if a different version of you could have saved it. That's where so much suffering lives, in the illusion of the second draft. But life is not a manuscript. It's a lived moment. And you lived it the best you could, with the tools you had and the heart you offered. Now, you offer that same heart back to yourself. You no longer beg your history to change its shape. You simply walk forward, carrying only what is necessary. Marcus Aurelius would write, "Don't stumble over something behind you." A gentle reminder, not a rebuke. Even he, an emperor, philosopher, and father, knew the weight of regret. And still he returned each day to what was present, what was his to choose. So do you. You've learned now that fixing what you love was never really the task. The task was remembering who you are when the fixing ends. And here you are. Not hollow, not bitter, but quieter, wiser, more anchored. You don't chase closure anymore. You create it in your rituals, your boundaries, your choices. You don't wait for apologies. You give yourself forgiveness. You don't demand to be understood. You learn to understand yourself. And in that understanding, you soften. The world didn't stop being chaotic, but you did stop matching its chaos with your own. And now, as you sit here, breathing, present, aware, you realize you're no longer in survival mode. You've made the transition from healing into becoming. That's why it feels different. You're not patching wounds anymore. You're building a life. You let people come and go now without attaching your worth to their staying. You love without the need to be needed. You hold space for others without making yourself small to fit inside their comfort. And most of all, you've stopped measuring your growth by what they would think of you now, because it no longer matters. You know who you are, and you're learning that you can be whole with or without what once defined you. You've stopped trying to fix what you love. Now you let it live in the past where it belongs, and you live here in this breath, in this moment, in this new season of your own becoming. You exhale. You make tea. You water a plant. You sit in your room as the light shifts across the walls, and you smile, not because it's all perfect, but because you are free. You find yourself laughing at something small. Maybe it's a line in a book. Maybe it's the way a bird hops sideways across the street. Maybe it's nothing at all, just a little burst of lightness that bubbles up and surprises you. And in that moment you realize, I forgot to be sad, not forever, not permanently, but for a minute, and that minute was real. This is how joy returns, not in a grand procession, but like a guest who knocks softly, not wanting to intrude. You almost miss it, but when you notice, you invite it in. The Stoics never promised a life free of pain, but they did promise that pain would not have the final word, not if you learned how to live beside it. Pain is an impression, Epictetus taught, and you have the power to interpret it. Tonight, you're beginning to interpret life differently, not through the lens of what's missing, but through the quiet abundance of what is. You see it in small things, how your body stretches in the morning, how a stranger holds the door for you, how the sky holds more color than you remembered. Grief trained your eyes to see loss, but healing is training them to see life again. And that life doesn't have to be dramatic or curated. It's not something you perform. It's something you participate in. You don't have to earn your way back into aliveness. You never left it. You simply forgot how to notice. You used to believe that moving on meant leaving love behind. But now you know love doesn't disappear. It just stops trying to control things. That's the difference between attachment and presence. Attachment says, I need you to stay so I can be okay. Presence says, I am okay even if you go. And the more present you become, the more you realize how many parts of life you'd been holding at a distance while trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. You missed so many sunsets. You paused so many plans. You lived in a future that never arrived, rewriting conversations that never happened. But now you eat when you're hungry. You rest when you're tired. You go for walks without needing a destination. That is sacred. And slowly, gently, a new kind of trust begins to take root, not in people, not in outcomes, but in the rhythm of life itself. You trust that whatever comes, you will meet it with steadiness. You trust that your worth is not something others grant you. It's something you carry, quietly, like a compass. You trust that the path ahead will not require you to betray yourself again. This doesn't mean you never struggle. It means you no longer abandon yourself when you do. The Stoics called this inner constancy, a steadiness that holds even when the waves return. And yes, they will return. There will be memories, sudden pangs, days when you miss what used to be. But now you let the wave come and go. You no longer try to stop it or hold it back. You ride it, like a seasoned sailor who knows the sea doesn't owe you calm. It just asks that you stay awake, So you do. You show up for your days, you water your plants, you respond to messages. You plan things not as distractions but as acts of choosing life. You even begin to imagine new love, not as a replacement but as a reflection of who you've become. You no longer seek a partner to fill the space. You seek someone to share the space you've built, with care, with patience, with intention. And until that person arrives, or even if they never do, you are already full, already enough, already more than you were when you first began to let go. Because in losing what couldn't be fixed, you discovered what never needed fixing to begin with. Yourself. There's a light in your room tonight that wasn't there before. It's not from a lamp, not from outside. It's the kind that comes from within, soft, steady, earned. You've carried it through shadow and silence, and now it glows quietly around you. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are. The journey hasn't erased your tenderness, it has refined it. What once made you ache now makes you wise. What once made you small now grounds you in something larger, not righteousness, not bitterness, just a deep, unshakable peace. You've stopped trying to fix what you love, and in doing so you've begun to love with open hands. You remember the person you once were, the one who begged, bent, broke in the name of preservation. You don't judge that version, you thank them. They were trying to survive. They didn't know any other way to hold on, but now you do. You've learned that love isn't possession, it isn't control, it isn't a project, it's a presence. A way of being that starts within you and flows outward, not as demand but as offering, as stillness. The Stoics would say you've returned to your nature, not to who you were before the hurt, but to who you were always meant to become through it. More discerning, more grounded, more free. You no longer ask, why did they leave? Or what else could I have done? You've let those questions dissolve, not because the answers don't matter, but because your peace matters more. You've chosen to stop building shrines to closure. You've chosen to walk forward with grace. There's a quiet nobility in this, the kind Marcus Aurelius spoke of when he wrote, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break." But it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. That's you now, not unfeeling, but unmoved by things that once shattered you. And in this space, a new kind of love begins to grow, not loud or fast, but slow and sacred. Love for the mornings you wake without fear. Love for the silence that no longer screams. Love for the